I would say be in the world, invest in your network, read relentlessly. If someone asks you to do something, try and say yes, which is why I'm here. And I do try, and it drives my PA completely mad because I do try to do a lot of this because you never know. I have two sort of mottos.
You never know.
You never know. And the second one, which gets me into a lot of trouble, is what's the worst that can happen, right? So
Debbie Wosskow, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks for having me from London. It's dark and cold here.
I love it. It's dark and not very cold in Tel Aviv. It's actually quite nice here in the middle of winter, but it's really great to have you here. I can't wait to talk about the sharing economy, which I know has been a topic of passion of yours for quite some time. But you've had some really incredible experiences with Love Home Swap, which you sold in 2017, and then with your most recent company that you've started now with AllBright from 2018 in the past 2 years, talking about the professional network for women. So a lot to talk about. But before all of that, I have to learn about what it's like to get married during quarantine and COVID.
Yeah, so I had a lockdown wedding in London, and I had that on about the last day that it was possible to have a wedding, and it was small but perfectly formed, but actually so much love in the room. And I think for the people who were there, it was one of the first times that they had been out or seen each other. But the main thing was that was my second marriage, and I have 2 children from my first marriage, and my husband has a child from his first marriage, and really it was their day. So it was a big party for them, but just a real highlight in a tough year that we've all had. So we'll always remember 2020 for good reasons as well as difficult reasons.
I love that. That's very inspiring. Debbie, tell me a little bit about your journey, because it's a really interesting journey, looking from the side, and then I'd love to transition to hearing a little bit more specifically about your ventures and about the sharing economy. But take me all the way back to Oxford. How do you get started with your entrepreneurial self, and what are some of the things that are guiding you as you're making your decisions to start these organizations?
It's very hard to see the narrative in a life that's being lived going forwards. But I think when you have some time to reflect on your why. I'm from a family of entrepreneurs. They wouldn't class themselves as entrepreneurs because that's quite a fancy word, but of business owners, of self-starters, a Jewish immigrant family to the UK. I'm third generation. And I grew up around people who work for themselves. I didn't know anybody in my extended family who had a conventional job. In particular, the women in my family, my mother, my grandmother, who I was very close to, who died age 97 a few years ago, were strong, tenacious women who controlled their own destiny, who ran businesses and were matriarchs. And that's very much, I suppose, the role model that I was very used to. And in those families, 2 things are quite important. I think everybody talks about work and business around the kitchen table, and I'm very aware of that with my own children, that it was very normal to talk about work. I spent a lot of my formative years driving around with my grandma in her armored vehicle, which she never learned how to reverse. That's one thing we have in common, being terrible drivers. Dropping money off at the bank, and it's what you see. So I think some of it is you have to see it to be it, particularly as a woman. The second thing is that academic excellence is non-negotiable. In that you have to work hard at school and be a good student. So I think those 2 things were very formative. But I do think I set up my first business at 25, so 21 years ago, and I think that it de-risks things if it's normalized to be part of an entrepreneurial self-starting community. It didn't feel risky. And if I look at my siblings, so from a big family, 1 of 5, everybody works for themselves. I actually work with my brother, the next one but one, you see what I mean, who was also at Oxford, the same college as me. I've worked with him for over a decade now. My middle sister is a psychotherapist, but she runs her own practice, and she runs buildings, and I think so much of it is on a nature nurture debate around normalization. Perhaps there's a bit in the genes, but I think it just felt like what you did. And I think for women, if I link that to my career and my business now, AllBright, I think positive female role models who take risks, who show that it's possible to start businesses in your 30s, which is the mean age to start a business, which is often when women are having children, I think really does make you see the art of the possible. And I think that's been a big part of it for me.
I love that. Talk to me a little bit about the love home swap. So home exchange, what even is that, and how do you even get into being in the home swapping market?
You know, I think you get different types of entrepreneurs. I'm quite simple in many ways in that I can only start and feel passionate about businesses that I can relate to, and to some extent where I am the ultimate consumer. That's not everybody's journey, but it's mine. So all of my businesses have come from a position of need or personal connection. And the love home swap story, and this is the real story, not just the sort of PR spin, is that I went on holiday when my children were tiny, 3 months and 2. And for people who have young children who are listening, those holidays are pretty miserable. You know, you sit in a hotel room with the lights off, and watching a movie with the sound off, eating room service, and you're feeding one another. And they're expensive, and they're not a life lived well. And on the flight on the way back from this holiday, I watched the movie The Holiday, which I actually rewatched this Christmas and does sort of hold up, which for those of you who haven't seen it, Cameron Diaz swaps homes with Kate Winslet. And it made me think, inspiration can strike at any time. So you have to have eyes and ears open and be in the world, is what I always say.
Right.
Kids, I think it's really important because that's where it always comes from for me. But it made me think, does that even exist? Because actually the holiday that I wish I just had was to stay in a home, not a hotel, to swap, frankly, at that time, my life with someone else's.
Right.
And I think particularly with small children, to be somewhere that was more spacious and in a community. And this was this was at the very early days of Airbnb. So the sharing economy, which I later became, I suppose, the sort of queen of in the UK. I authored the Wosskow Report to advise the UK government on how to regulate the sharing economy. I was the chair of Sharing Economy UK. So that sense of making more of the assets that you own and the skills that you have was a big part of my life for about 5 years. But at this stage, nobody was thinking about it in that way. But I think there was the sense in which we needed to make our assets sweat harder, and we needed to think about perhaps living life a bit differently. So the inspiration was the movie. I suppose then the test is, well, what do you do about it? And I think what entrepreneurs often have in common is they need an itch to scratch. They're very relentless. They don't let something drop. The test for me is always if it gives me goosebumps, or am I still? So I just kept on like, I could sort of see the market. And then, you know, I'm a management consultant from a million years ago. So I think you always then get taught to analyze an opportunity and product market fit. I think it's always a combination of analytics and instinct for me. Because my businesses are B2C businesses. So you've got to be able to get something up and running and consumer test it pretty quickly to check it's a thing. I suppose the sort of tipping point was my brother, Ben, who was about to go and do an MBA. And I dissuaded him from doing that and said, I've had this idea. Why don't you come and do it with me for 6 months? I'll salary you. It was my impoverished little brother. And I'd already had my marketing services business. And that was it. So look, from the outside, these things look super easy. In equal measure, it was hard, riddled with mistakes, exhausting, boring.
Can you give me an example of a mistake that you made that in hindsight you're saying?
I think that it takes, this would be if I'm to give any advice to people listening, to really find your sweet spot on product market and pricing fit just takes quite a long time, right? You don't just, maybe some people do, but I never do. So you're always tweaking it. And what if it's this? And what if it's that? And user testing this, and and we went down a few blind alleys, I think. The aha moment for Love Home Swap was around what became known as the three-way swap. In other words, I'd say for at least the first year of the business, we'd raised a little bit of capital. I'd funded it. We were, there was a thing. But you could, if I'm London and you're Tel Aviv, we could only swap with one another.
Right.
I think it was really freeing up and developing the algo that enabled London to swap with Tel Aviv, to swap with Paris. That then meant that this would be a 365-day a year. You could bank credits. And then I think that was inflection point one. Inflection point two was realizing, and this is why being in the world is really important. It was a bit like a modern day timeshare.
Right.
You were essentially banking time in your home as a tradable asset to trade
Right.
with someone else. And that was sort of a moment, because I didn't know the timeshare industry. But then I think this is another point around commitment and total immersion. I really got to know the timeshare industry. I went to all the timeshare conferences. I was in the room. And what happened then, and I'm a great believer in organized serendipity, which is partly when we talk about AllBright, I think is really important. I spoke at the European Timeshare Conference on why I thought home swapping was the future of timeshare. And I met someone from Wyndham, the hotel group, who owned RCI, the timeshare business, and that was the exit, right? So, right. And I think there's a real question mark, I think, around during the pandemic, networks, in particular networks for women. And that's always been a big passion, that women's networks are not as good as men. And networks are how you get shit done, right? Without networks, I didn't sell that business. Without realizing, okay, hang on, I think it's this, but actually it's this. So I would say be in the world, invest in your network, read relentlessly. If someone asks you to do something, try and say yes, which is why I'm here. And I do, and it drives my PA completely mad, because I do try to do a lot of this, because you never know. I have two sort of mottos.
You never know.
You never know. And the second one, which gets me into a lot of trouble, is what's the worst that can happen, right? So in those two things, you have to put yourself out there. And that was Love Home Swap, beginning to end, 5 years, exit. But honestly, there were so many moments where that could not have happened unless you were in the room, and you're always trying to frame and reframe what your business is. And don't be passionately committed to the mission.
Right.
But don't be 100% without openness committed to the original concept. Because it will change. It will just change, and you have to change with it.
I love that, the commitment to the mission, but also a commitment to being able to change the concept of how you execute on that mission.
There's no weakness in that, in the execution. We pivot. I mean, I don't even think of it as a pivot. It's just life, right? We're always doing that to try and change it up. And I mean, this sounds trite, and I don't want to sound trite when commenting on last year, but if life gives you lemons, you've got to make lemonade, right? And, I think that there's been a huge opportunity in the pandemic for businesses to really think about, how does their mission support people within the pandemic?
Right.
What do consumers want? What do they need? How can we best service them? And I think you can't, I've watched people around me, or businesses, because I'm a serial angel investor, and at AllBright we run our female founders pitch series. So we have 4 women pitching on 2 occasions a month. Every single month we see a lot of entrepreneurs, and my advice would be, you've got to roll with it. And I think a surprising amount of people don't, and you do have to.
I just love that, and I have to say, that I completely agree. This whole show came about in March, right at the peak of the first peak of the pandemic. I couldn't get into the Ubers and meet interesting people in the Valley, so I started meeting them on Zoom. And at the end, it was beautiful because I believe this is episode about 300 or something that we're recording, and it's pure lemonade that's come out of this. And I'm so thankful for people like you that are willing to come on the show and share their experience and insights. Debbie, tell me a little bit about the sharing economy, and then I'd love to move towards talking about AllBright and the amazing work that you're doing there for networking with women.
I suppose my final point on the sharing economy, and if people have the stomach for it, I wrote like 100,000 words on this thing, so you can go and read it. With huge opportunity comes masses of responsibility. That's life, right? So what was the opportunity? That because of digital platforms, digital payment platforms, that's been the big game changer for the sharing economy.
Right.
Businesses like starting with PayPal, but Stripe, that mean that I can set up a platform and take money in real time, anyone, anywhere, without going into too much detail. But when we first started Love HomeSpot, you couldn't do that, right? So we were having like banking accounts with money on escrow, 30-day payment, not possible. Everything's changed over a decade. Comes huge responsibility. And as ever, and I'm a philosophy graduate, right? So I like big questions. Some existential questions. What does it mean to be employed? How should people work? What does the future of work look like? What are the responsibilities of platforms? What does it mean to be self-employed? What's the responsibility of the state? How do it's like really big stuff. And I think that it's the most seismic shift of the last 50 years that we can, and it's been exacerbated by the pandemic. We can work differently. We have to work differently, right? It's a huge opportunity. It's an absolute radical shift in the world of work, and it has the potential to create massive problems around ethics, welfare, and the way that we look after people. So, it's not an easy one, but I like that kind of thing because I think that the more people, not just with theoretical brains, but with practical experience, you can try and think around those challenges, the better. And I think that the relationship between policy making and real life entrepreneurial and frontline business experience matters. And which I love that. I always have something like that on the go. At the moment, I'm on the Mayor of London's business board. I think that we should have a voice. We've got a responsibility. We can't complain about the laws that are made across the world if we're not standing up and being counted. So I always like to stand up and be counted.
I just love that. And in just a few words, a little bit about AllBright and why you're spending your time now working with this professional network.
So look, I guess again, with this sort of benefit of hindsight, sweep of history thing, I'm so used to being the only woman in the room that I don't even notice anymore, right? You're a woman who raises capital, then you are so in the minority, 2% of capital goes to back a female founder, 7% of investors are female, 2% at partner level, 1 in 6 in leadership positions in corporates. The stats for backing female founders are going down. The pandemic has made it work. Come on. So I think to this point on serendipity and being in the world, there have been different points in my life that change your life, different people that you meet that change your life, that you have to be open to. And right. I met Anna Jones, who's my co-founder in AllBright, at a party 4 years ago, a party I nearly didn't go to. And she was the CEO of Hearst, the publishing magazines business. A mutual friend introduced us and said, you two should be friends. And the world changed because we bonded over lots of things. Life, the universe, everything, kids the same age. We live in the same part of London. We like high heels and sequin dresses, whatever. But primarily, where are all the women became the theme.
Right.
And if we were going to set up a business that combined purpose with profit, this is my 4th business, it's got to get me out of bed in the morning. The one topic that I care about more than anything is driving gender equality and changing the world of work for women. not just entrepreneurs, but every woman, because it has not changed fast enough.
Right.
So that's what AllBright's about. It's called AllBright after the Madeline quote that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. So our hypothesis is this, that if women have better networks, if they can upskill, if they can access capital, if they can build confidence and resilience, then we're going to change the conversation for women at work. So it's a very ambitious
I love that.
objective. We want to build what we call a monster global sisterhood of smart-minded, ambitious women. And there are two parts to the business: physical space, which stands for something above and beyond bricks and mortar, challenging at the moment. Some open, some shut. We've got buildings in the States, buildings here. And then what has been a massive opportunity and hopefully a huge support during the pandemic is our digital platform. So for anyone listening, I'm afraid you do have to be a woman to do this. But go into the App Store and find the AllBright digital app. And it's a paid product, but you get 2 weeks for free, and then it's $120 a year. There's tons of upskilling content in there. And Anna and I wrote a book called Believe, Build, Become: How to Supercharge Your Career that was out last year, which you should also check out. And a lot of the content's on there, right? So everything: how to negotiate a pay rise, how to deal with imposter syndrome, how to
Amazing.
loads and loads and loads of women teaching. And then there's a community, and that's really important. So it's LinkedIn meets masterclass for women, if you like. The community's got loads of groups. It's incredibly active. And we have something called Sisterhood Matching, which is like our online dating for career women.
Amazing.
Match you up with other women around the world with similar interests, backgrounds, objectives. So it's an incredibly vibrant community, bigger, better than ever because of the pandemic. And I would encourage all of the women listening to this to check out AllBright Digital and also check out our book, which is very practical. So at the end of every chapter, we make you work. There's a lot of exercises. You've got to practice, you know, and that's one of our key messages, that it doesn't just happen, that you have to work at this. That for Anna and I, even though it all looks effortless, we game everything from, you know, dresses to delivery. And we would encourage other women to feel like they can do the same.
Debbie, I love that. Thank you for the inspiration. And by the way, that's exactly also the point that's important for me to address in this show. You remember one of the first questions that I asked was, what are some mistakes you've made with Love Home Swap? Because I think that's just such an integral part of every journey. And sometimes we forget when we look at these incredible success stories that every success comes after a multitude of failures. Small perhaps failures, but leading up to that, to those aha moments that at the end seem so linear with the narrative. But like you said, it's much easier looking backwards than forwards. Debbie, before we finish, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time, and I'd love to ask the most important question, which is 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Gosh, I would say determined, tenacious, and on a good day, hopefully fun.
Debbie, thank you very, very much. Best of luck with the dark, cold London right now. And I can't wait to share this with the world. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.